it sounds obvious, but I've had people make comments to me that like, you know, with AI, we're not going to need the Excel spreadsheets anymore. We won't even need a review because, you know, the AI will be so correct. My question is like, if AI can do everything so perfectly that there's no work left that you have to do in a spreadsheet and you don't need to review it, what are you going to do? What's the purpose for a CPA at all in that case?
Yeah. Bruce. Bruce.
Hey, David, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. We have one of the original entrepreneurs of the accounting tech world who's like sold many companies and has had a big impact in not only audit, but also tax. And we're really happy for you to join us today. Before we get into like everything, David, this is how I like to begin off my conversations with everyone. It's like, what made you want to go in accounting? Like, what was that initial step that pushed you like, okay, this is the career I want to be in?
I was an econ major, and as part of being an econ major, I took introductory accounting. And so my freshman year, I was in the class and people were complaining about how hard it was. And it's not like I loved it or anything, but it wasn't that hard for me. And then some seniors came in and talked about how they had just gotten jobs with big six firms and they were pretty well-paying jobs and there was a path to be a partner. And, I don't think anyone grows up with a dream of becoming an accountant. I think my dreams were much more practical and simple. It was, how do I finish college and know that I have a job lined up and a job that can lead to, a life where I can earn an amount of money that I could afford a lifestyle that was familiar to how I grew up. And my parents were aerospace engineers. So being a partner at an accounting firm was probably a bit better than that economically. And so it just seemed like it was something that was, there was a clear path that was set out that I could follow that could provide a good living. And I didn't think a whole lot about whether I'd enjoy accounting. I thought a lot about how I'd enjoy graduating from college and having that path set up.
So most people, when they take economics, especially like at the UC systems, right, because accounting's not a major, you have to minor in accounting and that's how you get through. Economics major mostly like tend towards like PE or IB or like consulting. And were some of those paths you considered, or you're like, okay, accounting, I'm really good at it. I have this competitive, unfair advantage, as I call it. Is that what like leaned you in?
Well, I, as you mentioned, I had a minor in accounting, and I think I kind of knew that I wanted to come out of college and just start being an independent adult. I didn't want to go to grad school and and that type of thing. I didn't grow up knowing anyone that was in. I had never heard of private equity, until I was running SurePrep, and I'd heard of investment banking. I didn't know anyone that did that, so I just never considered those things. And it seemed like, a path that was available immediately after graduating. And so, like I said, it was really kind of convenience, practicality. Not what are my big dreams or anything like that.
Okay, so then you start off there at Cooper's Library, which is now called PwC. Over there, you pick audit over tax, but back then they were also like made you do both audit and tax you had to do. How was that first year like? Were you just like, is that what you were expecting when you went in? What kind of projects were you working on? What aspects of auditing were you doing? Were you doing inventory, cash, revenue?
So I started out in audit, which in California, you need to get audit hours to get your CPA. So you always want to start an audit. And I pretty quickly realized that it wasn't something that I was going to enjoy. I did an inventory count at the Kraft warehouse once, Kraft food, and the majority of the value, like over 90% of the value of the warehouse of the inventory was in the freezer. So the person who planned the audit decided that the entire inventory count would be in the freezer. The freezer had 6 stacks of 10-foot pallets, so 60 feet high. You need to go up in a scissor lift. You had to wear a complete outfit, that went over your face because it was so cold in there. You could only be in there about 15 minutes before you had to take the scissor lift into the refrigerator to warm up. And so, I'd be in there doing inventory counts, and it was kind of interesting. They had boxes of Red Lobster and of Wendy's hamburger patties and of Tony Roma's ribs. I never realized Kraft made all those things for those restaurants. So that aspect of it was interesting to me. but not the actual doing the work. And there was another time that I was at a client's office in Orange County, and they were showing me, they made corrugated boxes, and they showed me how they would take some cardboard, and it would go on a table that looked like an air hockey table, but the holes in the table were in reverse. It sucked the concrete down. And then a laser like designed where the corrugations would be. And then, they a knife cut it, and that was used to create the prototype. And I remember feeling so interested in the business itself. And when the tour ended and we went back to the room at that time, you did all your auditing on site with the client, because you'd have to walk down to the controller's office or the CFO's office and ask for documents, and they'd give them to you on paper. There weren't portals or anything. And so, once they brought us back into the conference room where us auditors were sitting and we started doing our work, I remember just kind of my heart sinking into my stomach, thinking like that the business was interesting, but now I have to do the work. So I started to realize that auditing wasn't for me. And so maybe tax was better. So I said, can you move me over to tax after I got my audit hours? And that's how I went to tax.
And then in tax, were you doing federal, state? Were you specializing in an industry?
I was doing a lot of business returns and provisions. So tax return, Corp, C Corp, partnership tax returns, and the related provisions for the audits. I did a lot of that. And this was also a time when everything was paper-based. So we had these paper binders, and we would print something that we did in Excel out, and we had 8.5 by 14 sheets in the binder. So I'd have to take one of these 8.5 by 14 sheets, put these round reinforcers on the holes so that it wouldn't tear off, and put it in the binder. I'd have to use one colored pencil to put in the work paper index number. I'd have to staple the printed Excel pages onto that, numbers and sub numbers, and I'd have to use tape. And I remember feeling like, is this kindergarten? I have colored pencils and tape and staplers. And then you make a change to the spreadsheet and you have to redo that all, rip out the old one, print out the new one, redo all the work. So, I pretty quickly realized that tax wasn't going to be my calling either. And there was a time when I felt a little despondent, because I said, okay, I graduated college. I got the job that I precisely tried to get. And now I'm in that job and I realize I don't like it and I don't know what I want to do. And then I thought, well, at least I know one thing I don't want to do. So, by order of exclusion, I at least have one thing I can knock off the list, but I didn't know what I wanted to do for a while. And until I met a person who he became my mentor, and he was an entrepreneur. And like so many people who say, I have an idea for this, that, or the other, I told him that. And he said, why don't you write a business plan and raise some money and start a company?
So, okay. Yeah. So let's go back. Let's talk about ePACE, right? It's 97. Accounting tech is not that big category of investment as it is today. How was that initial phase of what was the first eureka moment? You're like, I want to focus on this. And then how was that trying to gather feedback for the product? Because right now it's really easy. You can DM thousands of people online and reach out. Back then it wasn't that easy. You probably had to go to your connections to ask for feedback, and you're building software. So what were those initial days like?
Yeah, they were tough, because to get kind of those initial sites that are going to give you the feedback and initially be your first test sites, first of all, I had to cold call them. They had to literally open the phone book and keep calling people and leaving voicemails until I got a few firms that were willing to meet with me. Then I met with them and said, here, I'm going to build this, and you'll be able to use it for free for a certain amount of time and give us your feedback as to how it should work. So it'll be customized for you. And in the end, if you like what we've done, then you can buy it at a discount. And so I found 3 firms in the area, and then at one point, one firm in Bellevue, Washington, that were willing to do this. And so I started off with these 4 firms, developing ePACE and having them test it. And 3 of them ended up going with it. And one of them, who specialized in government audits, didn't. They had some more specialized needs.
So over there, you guys had this really interesting approach in the beginning where you integrated directly into Word and Excel, right? Over there, was that a deliberate decision, or did you come across it from some initial interactions, or was that to cut the time of the distribution for the firm?
Yeah, there was really kind of 2 things that we were anchored to at ePACE. One was a paperless engagement. So being able to, because remember, like I said, when I was doing both audit and tax, this was all paper-based binders. To go out to the client, you had to bring the binders with you, which meant somebody in the office didn't have access to them. So one of it was paperless engagement. The other thing was I started ePACE in 1997, and Office 97 was the first version of Office that had VBA, Visual Basic for Applications, which would allow you to write custom software that worked within Word and Excel in their own toolbars. And so, one thing I had noticed was that even though there was at the time what they called just trial balance software, it wasn't like a binder software. It was literally kind of like a spreadsheet grid that did have some kind of financial statement generation reporting component, but it was very inflexible. You couldn't do all the formulas that you can do in Excel. It didn't have all the formats and layouts that Word and Excel do in terms of fonts and, the rich formatting. And as a result, and they were hard to use. So as a result, I couldn't find almost any accounting firms that automated their financial statement prep with those applications. They preferred to enter everything manually into Word and Excel because that gave them the most control over how the financial statements and work papers were formatted. And so the idea was, why don't we allow them to keep using what they're using, Word and Excel, but then connect it with trial balance automation through the Office 97 VBA capability. And that was novel. I think we were the first people to do it. I mean, that was a big part of us winning that market.
So when was that first feeling of product market fit for you? Like, when did you actually felt like, okay, this is like something, this is a product people want?
I think when we got to the end of the pilots and, 3 of the 4 said, we're going to keep using this. We're going to move forward with it. And these were substantial firms, meaning they were each firms with 50 or more people in them, 50 to 100 people. And they said, we're going to keep using it. Then that was, I think, the first indication that we're actually onto something. It didn't go too far because, the whole life of the company was 3 years. We were selling product for maybe the last year and a half of that. And very quickly, CCH came. They had a trial balance software that was called Audit Vision at the time. Once again, not paperless engagement, just kind of a grid, that you can import a trial balance to. And they made an offer that, in hindsight, I think I sold too quickly, and I should have kept it going. But I was a 28-year-old young person at the time, and it seemed like a lot of money to me, and it was. And it also it allowed me to get comfortable, and it created a track record that allowed me to start SurePrep much more easily than when I started ePACE.
So let's go back. 28, CCH comes, giant in the space, and then like, hey, I want to buy your software. Like, is your first reaction like, are you kidding me? Or is this like?
Well, I was going to need to raise more money anyways, because we weren't profitable yet. And so, and the whole situation was pretty stressful for me. I had friends and family that had put in money, and I was worried about losing their money. So I was like, wow, this is going to be amazing. At the same time, I knew it wasn't enough money for me to never work again.
Yeah.
But I that was okay. I did buy a beautiful home in Newport Beach overlooking the ocean and have enough to start SurePrep. So it wasn't, insubstantial either. But I knew I'd have to do something else, and I was okay with that because it, was a game changer. But like if I was talking to other entrepreneurs right now after having done that, and by the way, the person who I mentioned that was my mentor, and he also was one of the first investors and a shareholder, and he was a wealthy entrepreneur. He said, I don't think you should do it because this company has so much, this product can go so much further. But I realize you're in a different financial position than me, so I leave it up to you. So I did it. He saw that we shouldn't. And I would tell any, entrepreneur right now that if you get to that stage where you've got a product built and customers saying yes, you're through the hardest part, and stick with it. Don't get out to make a few bucks, stick with it longer.
Okay. So then you go over there, and ePACE is still used by like CCHs. Right? It has the access over there. It's still used like all of those years later, but you were only there for a year. And most engagements, when you sell, you have to like go on, work and transition over the team, and they have like a 3-out period, usually like 1 to 3 years over there. You spend 1 year, and now you jump into SurePrep, which is tax, and it is individual tax. So what was the story behind that? Because you, as you said, you had business tax experience before this.
Yeah, and I had some individual tax, but it was more business tax. So I read an article that EY had started an office in India to prepare tax returns. And this was, towards the end of the year that CCH didn't really utilize me. I was kind of, for almost that entire year, I was had nothing to do. The CEO changed midterm, and I met with the new CEO on his first or second day and told him that I wasn't doing anything, and if he wanted to cut me loose, he could. And he said, no, just hang on in case we need you. So they knew I wasn't doing anything, and they weren't trying to get anything from me, so I had time to think of new ideas. And so I saw that EY had opened an office to outsource returns to India. It's their own returns, so offshore them. And I thought, of course, everything else is manufactured offshore. Why shouldn't tax returns be? And, the big four firms have the scale to set up something like that in India or wherever, but most firms won't. And we should create a shared service so the rest of the market can do what the big four do. And that was the initial idea. And so we started off as an outsourcing company. And it started off really strong. And, I think we started in August. And for our first tax season that following January, we did over $500,000 in business. And this was in the tax season that started in 2003. So it was, and then the next year we did over 2 million. So we quadrupled. We said, oh my God, we just hit this, and it's starting off gangbusters. And we said, well, if we want to continue to grow, if we want to double the returns, we don't want to have to double the amount of people. We should automate that with technology. So we started researching how OCR technology could automate the business. That's how we got into the technology side. And then we started using that internally, and it was helping us. And all of a sudden, the IRS passes Section 7216 that requires consent. It's during a presidential election year when outsourcing was considered a bad word, and none of our customers wanted to ask for that consent from their clients. Mm-hmm. And immediately in 1 year, we lost 2/3 of our business, and we had to figure out what were we going to do. And we said, no one wants outsourcing anymore, but everyone wants technology automation. Maybe we can sell this OCR stuff that we created to automate our outsourcing, but just sell it as a technology solution. And it wasn't easy to change from being a service provider to a technology provider, but ultimately it did transform the company. And for example, in our initial vision, big four firms were never going to be a part of our market because they were going to have their own India operations. And by the time I sold SurePrep, 3 of the big four were customers because they were using our software in their India offices. So yeah, it went through that change.
But okay, so at one point, you guys also had the people that were working in this offshore side. Nobody could have phone at their desk. There was a camera that could utilize that. Is that after 7216 was issued, or did you guys knew this would be like one of the bigger concerns for privacy and data regulation and data security for your customers? Because it was like, this is way ahead of its time, right? And that issues like metrics that you guys introduced. So how did you guys decide upon that?
One thing to be clear on is that 7216 to me seemed to be political. It had nothing to do with data security. For example, if you have your client's data on a server in your office in the US, but you don't maintain good security, and that server can be hacked to by people anywhere in the world, mm-hmm. That seems to me to be a pretty big potential problem. But that that was never addressed. Another example is, it was just, you would need this consent for anyone looking at it outside of the United States. So if you are a U.S. partner in a U.S. tax prep firm and you're traveling to Europe on vacation and you want to log in to look at some work while you're there, technically you would be violating 7216 if you didn't first have a 7216 because you're a person outside the United States. So it wasn't well thought through there. It's not secure to have papers laying out on a desk where janitors are walking by and no one knows who's looking at anything. So this had nothing to do with security. I think SurePrep always was cognizant of security and privacy, and we address those issues with our customers. 7216 did not address privacy or security. It addressed a political issue of wanting to try to curb offshore outsourcing. And the firms who decided they didn't want to get the consent sign, it wasn't because they thought it was not secure, because if they had thought that, they wouldn't have signed up with us in the first place and then quit. They didn't go forward. They didn't get the consent sign because they were afraid that their customers would have a negative reaction to offshore outsourcing from a political standpoint.
But okay, here's where I get like a little confused. I'm like, if they were trying to curb outsourcing and the compliance piece is the most labor intensive and like where the margins are the least, wouldn't it be beneficial for a firm's interest to outsource, automate that part so you can like go into the high value work, high value margin work, which is the advisory side?
The firms were interested. We lost 2/3 of our clients, and we went from 500,000 to 2 million in 1 year. They were very interested. It was only once the IRS said to continue with this practice, you have to get the 7216 consent signed. It has to be these exact words. You can't change them at all. And it has to be on 12-point font on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. And the very first sentence says, federal law requires me to get your consent before I share your information with anyone for any reason other than the purpose of preparation. So right there, it makes it sound like you're sharing it for some reason other than the preparation.
Yeah.
When the only reason why you'd be sharing it with SurePrep is for the purpose of the preparation. We went to the IRS and we said this sentence is misleading because our clients are only sharing it to us. We need to change that sentence. And they said, oh, you're right. It does say misleading, but it is what it is. That's how it's worded.
And now we're going to the same issue. I hear every single day from users. They're like, okay, what about 7216 if I do AI tax prep or AI tax research? Then I ended up creating these guidelines where like, okay, which bucket does it fall into and where do you need consent or not to like help to like better address those? Because there's those 3 buckets where you're like, okay, explicit disclosure or like you need to consent or not.
7216 helps nothing or nobody. And the firms have enough on the line with their own reputation. I mean, if they are not careful and there's a data privacy issue and that becomes known, that is as much incentive as any firm needs.
And so, okay, so then at SurePrep, this is the first, you got your private equity investment coming in at the company at SurePrep. What made you want to reach out? What has been like your experience by getting private equity investment compared to like venture capital investment into the company?
I never got venture capital investment. I started off with ePACE. It was a very small group of friends and family. And then when I did SurePrep, I was able to put some of that money in myself, and my previous investor group wanted to put in more money than I was asking for. It was oversubscribed. So that's how we kind of got started. And SurePrep never took more than $7 million. In the first 5 years, we took $7 million in from that investor group over the 2 years to start, and then $2 million to start, and then another $5 million over the next 5 years. And so after that $7 million, we never took in any primary capital. Back in 2019, we brought on a private equity partner, Bregal Sagemount, and it was entirely secondary, meaning they bought a 30% interest in the business, but just from existing shareholders. And it was a way to allow people who had been investors for 15 years to get the ability to cash out. I took some of my chips off the table, and some other key people did too. But it was only a 30% interest we sold. We kept most of our chips on the table. It probably depends who you get as your partner. Bregal Sagemount was a great partner to us. When we didn't agree with one of their suggestions, they respected that and our knowledge of the business. But then they brought a lot of suggestions that we did take and that helped improve sales and marketing and even adoption of AI and things like that. So they were a value add partner.
And then what was like something you took away from like your ePACE into SurePrep in terms of like your leadership styles and like because the first time building a company is a lot different than the second time. It's like a lot new skill set you learn. So what did you think you brought in from ePACE into SurePrep that helped it scale to the level it got?
I think a few things. I mean, first of all, I was a bit older, and that gave me a little bit more confidence because at ePACE, I remember I was 24 when I started it, and I was interviewing people to work for me that were 40 plus, and I was raised as to respect your elderly, and it felt awkward to me to have people so much older than I was reporting to me. And so that part of it was a little awkward for me. Just being older and having the success under my belt, I think made me feel a little bit more comfortable in that seat, managing others. And then also I learned some things from my mentor in the first business with ePACE that definitely carried on. For example, when you start a new business and you're a first time person and you desperately want it to succeed, and sometimes that desperation might lead you to do things that, ultimately aren't helpful. So for example, my first instinct was to tell these 4 firms that were doing the pilot testing that they could have it for free as long as they pilot tested. And my mentor said, a deal for nothing is worth nothing. And how are you going to show investors or anyone else, what it's worth if you don't convince anybody to pay for it? I mean, you can give them a discount for a couple of years if they decide to go with it. You have to show that someone's willing to pay for it. You have people that come to you all the time and say, "What? You want to charge this? Someone else is CCH or Thomson Reuters or Intuit or whoever the big players that they're dealing with wants to charge me much less." And my mentor, really taught me about not getting sucked into that and to sell based on differentiating your value. And he told me something called a chicken story, which a lady goes into a butcher and says, "How much for a pound of chicken?" And he says, "It's a quarter." And she says, "A quarter? Across the streets, it's a nickel. It's a nickel." He says, "Why don't you go over there?" She says, "Well, they're out of chicken." And he says, "Well, lady, whenever I'm out of chicken, you can have it for a nickel too." But meaning like they don't have what we have. And I would tell firms to listen, it's true we're not the cheapest, but we provide the most value. And I don't need to explain that to you because are you the cheapest firm in your market? And they say, "No." I'm like,
so it's that belief in your product, in your team,
right,
that, hey, that we can like actually do things, right? Because it's like for us, even as like all the founders who are coming into the space, we mark them really low and then we try to like sell it at a discount just to get users in the pace.
Right. And so, like having the confidence to say, no, this, we need to charge for it and it's worth it. And here's why. And here's why you can't compare it to the other things. That was something I learned to do at ePACE. And then, that served me well going forward.
So then Thomson Reuters comes in. Was that the first time somebody came in to acquire SurePrep?
No. CCH came in early on, maybe when I was like 4 years into it. And there was this younger lady CEO of Thomson Reuters at the time of the tax and accounting division. And she, said she was interested. And we were talking about a number in like the high 20s in terms of 20 million. Mm-hmm. And once again, I thought, this isn't really going to be enough for me to live on for the rest of my life, but it's after only 4 years and maybe I do it again. And the bottom line is, she backed out. We didn't get too far. We weren't in due diligence or we'd never had an accepted offer, but she found some reason, why she decided that it wasn't the right time for her to move forward. And so like a lot of times what you achieve in life is going to be through luck. Like I was very lucky that didn't pan out. Like I owe her a big thanks for backing out because we ended up selling for over 500 million. Yes. And we took tens of millions out in profits before that. So thank goodness that deal never went through.
So then how does that Thomson Reuters deal come in? They call you, they're trying to like poach you, they're trying to get you in. And then also, what's your take on like the new strategies by firm of doing these acqui-hires where this morning, if you just saw Meta just invested $1 billion to acqui-hire this guy to run the WhatsApp department. So what's your take on like these new strategies coming into play?
I think that makes potentially more sense than, some other things that firms are doing. So, for example, you see things now of like if you heard this kingmaker strategy, where VC firms will just put in $100 million into like a seed round or 75 million into a seed round before you really even know what the product is, or, you're burning through all of this money while you're still trying to figure out what the product is. And maybe it works sometime, but I've always been under the feeling that you should spend as little money as possible until you really understand what the product is. And then once you understand it and you've got something, then you put the money in. In the world of programming, they have something called a 10Xer, like a programmer that can output 10 times what other people can do. And so in the world of technology, having the right approach can mean the entire difference, So if you really have a single person that can do that, then I think it makes more sense than just dumping 100 million on a seed round so that you can put a stake in the ground, a flag, and say, we're going to be number one as evidenced by putting 100 million in.
I've been seeing that, especially if you can see the ERP space. There's like 3 big new entrants in this space, each with massive rounds coming in. And we don't know who's going to be the winner in this, right? And what I believe, my thinking is like nobody wants to miss out and they want to like just back a company. They can like do it, right? And then that's basically the kingmaker strategies. But one thing I keep hearing about the accounting tech space is people come in, they understand it's going to be like the model at SaaS going to work the same way here, but they realize working with accounting firms takes a longer time to acquire, then onboard, does have those relationships, and it's a very slow paced process. Have you seen that being implemented? Is that what you see, people who want to come in with massive rounds and they're feeling that and seeing that now?
100%. And I think what I've seen when I started my companies, the people who started companies in this space used to come from accounting firms. I mean, they were people who understood the business and the workflow and the work being done. And now I see a lot of people coming in and, they maybe they were in a technology company in some other space, or they came from a VC firm, and they've heard that AI is going to displace professional services like tax and accounting. And because they know VC firms are looking to invest in that space, they say, I'm going to start a company in that space. But they don't really have any original ideas. So they say, I'm going to create the next SurePrep or the next SafeSend or something like that, but it's going to be on AI. And those companies are for sure facing a very hard time getting firms to switch. Because here's the thing. I mean, let's say tax prep was this, and SurePrep brought it to that.
Yeah.
And SurePrep is now tightly woven into the firm's fabric. They've used the APIs to connect it to their document management system and their client portal and their billing system and so on. And now someone's coming to them and say, oh, I got a replacement, and it's better because it's AI and it'll take your time down from here to here. You'll have to rip out everything and rip out your workflow and, And the truth of the matter is, when you've got something that people have been pretty happy with that's connected to the rest of the ecosystem, good enough becomes hard to beat. And I think that that's what they're finding. And, my advice would be, don't come into this space to just try to replace an established product category that is, that you have very well entrenched and integrated legacy players, and hope that people will make a quick rip and replace decision, because accounting firms won't do that. If you want a quick decision, be more creative, address something that's not addressed, that's being done manually, something that they can add to their current workflow to gain efficiency, not have to go through a rip and replace to gain some marginal benefit.
And then, so you sell SurePrep becomes part of like Thomson Reuters' big suite of tools. And over there, I was a big user of Thomson Reuters tools when I was at EY. You're the GM at Thomson Reuters. What does that role look like? What are you doing there? And you stay there for a while compared to like your time at CCH. What made you want to stay at Thomson Reuters over there? What was your role exactly?
It wasn't really the plan to stay there when I sold. They had told me that their plan was to integrate SurePrep into Thomson Reuters, meaning it wouldn't be a separate company, and so there'd be no CEO type position.
Yeah.
And I had committed to helping them integrate it, and that's what I had done. In about I would say 7 or 8 months after the acquisition, that integration was done, and there wasn't much for me to do. And I thought that my working days were over. And they came and said, we know about your past with ePACE. We have an audit business that was pretty sizable. I think when I started, it was about 230 million in revenue. And they said, we think it could do much better. And would you lead that as general manager? Took a look around, and I realized that so many firms are still on a really old technology stack. They're still on CCH Engagement, the product I created, or Caseware Desktop. There's a lot of room to bring improvement to that market. I wasn't really sure how else I wanted to spend my time, to be honest. I still had one child at home. So it's not like I could just travel everywhere. So I took that position, and it was great. It's a highly matrixed organization. So as general manager, you have basically the sales team report to you, which was about 100 people. product and engineering, all are their own organizations, and you have people that support your business, but they don't report to you. And I went to Elizabeth Beestrom, who still is the president of that business, the tax and accounting business. And I said, I'm used to being CEO, and I'm not sure how I will work in this type of structure. And she said, just act like you are a CEO, and that will work. She said, I have the same issue. Just act like you are a CEO, and that will work. And she was right. And I just ran it like I was CEO, and the product and engineering and marketing people seemed to kind of respect that. And it worked out well, and we accomplished some very nice growth in the 2 years I was there, which is what I had agreed to go on for.
So then I always ask my guests this question is like, what would you do when you're done with tax and accounting and like this profession? So what did you focus on when you were finally done with like sold to companies and now you're an advisor? What's one hobby you picked up, or what one thing you always wanted to do and be like, I'll do it when I'm done?
So, I play golf as much as I can. I keep saying I'm going to pick up piano again, but I haven't really done that one yet. But I stayed pretty busy with the tax and accounting space. So I've done several investments. Crunchify was one of them, and I joined the Crunchify board. I've done a couple others, involved in some more startup type organizations and providing some counsel there. So I still stay really busy because I enjoy it. And I think this is an exciting time to be innovating in this industry. If you have an original idea, not just like saying, I'm going to, recreate something that everyone already uses and is fine with.
Yeah. And then, so why Crunchify? I'm interested, like why that specific lease accounting sector? I remember taking the class in intermediate accounting, and I'm like, why are there two types of leases? And now they changed it, and now it's just basically all capital leases.
Well, Crunchify built a very nice business pretty quickly with their business plan of selling to companies that have, that have to account for leases through the CPA firms, creating a very nice CPA firm channel and relationships with, hundreds and hundreds of CPA firms. But as you might have seen, they joined the Thomson Reuters PPC methodology automation platform as a partner. And so part of that is taking technology to help automate parts of the PPC audit plan. And so they do. So audit's something that I've been, involved with for the last few years. And it's something that I've become, updated on in terms of how technology impacts it. And I took a look at their business plan on how they plan to expand beyond leases into automating more parts of the audit. And I thought it made sense. I like the leadership team and the private equity firm that backs them, Aqualine. And so that's why I made that investment.
And so right now, do you ever want to like go to college, teach? Is that one of your thing, or go on a speaking circuit tour? Because I feel like you have such a unique experience of like being an entrepreneur who was also an auditor, and people could learn about it. Have you ever thought about like doing that in this space?
I do like mentoring and helping people, but I think more on a smaller setting versus something like what you described. One thing too, just to go back on Crunchify, but just in general, they take an approach to building a business where, they're building a business in a profitable way. And I see so many companies now that throw that out the window. And once again, sometimes that works, but when it doesn't work, it can be very painful. And so I prefer to partner with people who share that value of building a real business that includes profit. And they agree with that.
You should see like the kind of discussions we have before we buy any pro plan for any Gmails we had to do for the first year of our company. The amount of time we went back and forth of like paying $7 a month per user.
Right.
Yeah. So now you're over there. I saw this article you wrote in 2025 talking about the issues in accounting, and you talk about like complexity is a problem. And do you want to expand more upon what you mean by that? Because I also see at the same time, there is a pipeline problem still there, even though accounting recruitment is up back now. There is like, do you think we as a profession could do more, or where could we do better to fix both the pipeline and the complexity problem that AI is trying to solve? If you're trying to move this profession forward in the AI world, how do we use AI that not only pushes the AI forward, but there's this big issue of burnout in the profession where people just leave and they start like completely different careers. And this profession is vital to like financial statements are vital, tax return advisory is vital to the economy. And like you can see where economies do not have good accounting system backed infrastructures, how poorly their economies do compared to like where US has a very robust system.
Yeah, I think that first of all, we have to realize that AI is here to assist humans, not to replace them. And, it sounds obvious, but I've had people make comments to me that, like, you know, with AI, we're not going to need the Excel spreadsheets anymore. We won't even need to review because, the AI will be so correct. My question is like, if AI can do everything so perfectly that there's no work left that you have to do in a spreadsheet and you don't need to review it, what are you going to do? What's the purpose for a CPA at all in that case? I've had like people who are CTOs of accounting firms say that they're hearing that argument and considering it maybe because some AI vendor told them that. So I think we need to realize that, AI is here to assist us human professionals, not to replace us, and that we should be thinking about AI to adapt to the firm and to the people of how they want to do things, not the other way around. Not to say you got to change the way you're doing things in order to use AI, and you now need to, change your workflows and take these templates that we're going to provide you and not work in Excel anymore, but only a web page and right. Yeah. Not AI shouldn't be changing us. It should be adapting to the way we do things and making the way we do things easier. For the longest time, with companies like SurePrep and many others, the idea was to create standardized workflows because they were repeatable and consistent, and you could accomplish efficiency levels that were consistent and quality levels that were consistent. But a lot of clients didn't fall into that, and so they either didn't use those clients with SurePrep or whatever, or they had to do a lot of supplemental work around it. I see now leading AI companies coming in and saying the same thing, that standardize your process using our software and you get super efficient. And I think it should be the opposite. I think that with AI, it gives us the ability to respect that clients are different, that engagements can be unique and can't all fit into one standardized process. And we should be looking for AI that allows us to have more client-centric approaches and and still get the benefits of automation and improved quality without highly standardized workflows. I think that, we need to realize that the purpose of AI isn't to just extract more data from more documents, as some people seem to think it is, but rather to give us a work quality product that's equivalent to like what an experienced preparer might be able to do today, which is a much harder problem than just recognizing more documents. Yeah. I think we need to get away from this idea that AI is, it's okay for it to be like a black box and give us answers and that we don't need a work paper to review it. I've had many people say, do we even need work papers anymore? AI, I say, how are you going to review it? Well, AI will tell us. I mean, AI, part of what it should do is not just give us the answer, but let us know how it came to that answer. So you're going to still need work papers, right? One thing in common with the past is it'll continue to do what technology has done, which push people to make higher level judgments and decisions, including pushing preparers to reviewer levels. But I think this is where we need to focus, our AI efforts on. And I think that there's, as you can tell, a lot of AI companies not delivering this type of message and accounting firms not having these types of expectations, thinking it should be more of the same where we have to standardize and adapt our process to the technology. And I think it should be the opposite now with AI.
So the technology adopts to the process because now it's able to do that. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to jump in like a few final like personal questions. So I see you're a fan of history. Anything you're reading right now, and like what's your favorite historical period you like going back to?
Historically, I love books on the American Revolution, and in particular, how someone like George Washington, could take a job that seemed impossible, and get it done. And even though he was so insecure on the inside, the letters showed that he was filled with self-doubt, but no one on the outside could see anything other than, self-assuredness and confidence. So obviously, I think when you're trying to start a business, there are analogies there. I can go so far back as the Bible, and At one point, Moses says to his father-in-law, Jethro, that everyone's coming to me with every problem, and I'm just overwhelmed. I can't take it all. And he says, well, you need to appoint chiefs and you need to appoint judges and you need to have each person be in charge of a group of this and so on. So that's something that I think is highly analogous to starting a business. So I think you can find inspirations, in kind of everything you come across.
Nice. And then what was like one unreasonable purchase you did after you sold your first either company?
Well, I did buy a nice house on a golf course in the desert in the Palm Springs area, Target. So the SurePrep's name, Thomson Reuters, it calls it Aurora. So we were Project Aurora. We were always referred to as Aurora. And so we named our house out in the desert Casa Aurora.
And is that where you like spend most of your like time?
We spend a lot of time in the winter there. It's too hot now in the summer, but yeah, November to May, we spend a lot of time there. And it's 2 hours away from our home in Newport Beach. So
okay, nice. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I love Newport Beach. I go to Lido a lot. But this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. The users will love hearing this and such a unique perspective. And thank you so much for coming on here.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bruce.